AGATOTROPIC HORMONE by Stanislaw Lem. Originally published in a collection of the author's stories entitled Sesame and Other Stories in 1954, which was reproduced the following year simply as Sesame or Sesame. The story's structure was quite obviously inspired by the classic 1805 novel The Manuscript Found at Saragossa by Jan Potocki, a fellow Polish author. Read by Darrell T. Smith II for my channel, Quasar Spectra. Agatotropic Hormone. The Secretary of State set aside the last signed document and lifted his head. Through the tall windows streamed the yellowish glow of a late autumn, dry this year, glittering in reflections across the polished surface of his desk. The vast room was steeped in silence. The climate system worked noiselessly, pumping in air with a faint scent of spruce. The great clock above Washington's portrait ticked steadily, and every few dozen seconds the frosted glass of the door caught the shadow of a guard pacing the corridor. Dulles rubbed the stiff folds beneath his chin, swallowed a vitamin pill, and glanced at the clock. There was still an hour before the conference. He looked around the room, as though hoping something of interest might appear in the wide, empty space between the two rows of towering file cabinets. Adjusting himself in the chair, he reached for the pile of newspapers and magazines on the side table. Bored, he flipped idly through the glossy pages of an illustrated weekly. Gleaming cars flashed before him, along with the inviting smiles of women. He read an advertisement for an anti-atomic brassiere, skimmed the issue, and was about to toss it aside when his eyes caught on a bold red headline slashing diagonally across the page. The first two sentences intrigued him. He leaned back, crossed one leg over the other, and began to read. Manuscript Found in a Bottle. Part 1. On the 6th day before the Ides of August, in the year of our Lord, 1777. In God's name, I, Caballero Diego y Canavellias, Portuguese traveler and scholar, humble servant of King Alfonso the Aged and Queen Jezebel, begin, by the grace of the Holy Spirit, the truest account of my vast wanderings, overseas voyages, and extraordinary marvels which I have endured and enjoyed through 64 years of earthly life. Amen. I was born in Sagres, a modest port town, where Jesuit fathers trained me in all manner of virtues, with reeds, admonitions, and ropes well applied. Grateful though I was, I often fled from their lofty monastery on the hill, only to be dragged back by my mother, the noble Lady Gregoressa, who hauled me by the ear to the Lord's table. Thus did my youth pass in pious discipline. I studied geography under Father Hyacinth of John in Oil, who demonstrated the roundness of the globe upon our heads, mathematics and algebra under Father Boniface of All Saints, who inscribed the multiplication table upon my soul for eternity, and both Greek and Roman calligraphy, which left me with a crooked spine and a left ear longer than the right by 2 inches and 7 incubuses, from frequent tuggings. Wearied of cloistered life, I sought change. Having received my first sacraments and acquired foreign tongues, Altabasean, Coromandic, Pintashivian, and the dialect of the Yalpominai, I set sail in 1709 aboard the Galeota Santa Eubrazia. She belonged to Montabraj, a Venetian merchant famed as both slave trader and devout Catholic, much favored by the Church. He even held a papal license from Cardinal Bragoncia to strip the hides of Africans in strips, only as needed. For being pagans, it was deemed no sin. The Galeota itself was ancient and falling apart, for Montabraj, obsessed with heaven, refused earthly repairs. Worse still, the ship's privies were sealed, for the merchant required fertilizer for his vast Lisbon gardens. Thus the crew's waste was stored in the hold, and after each voyage the vessel sank 6 feet deeper from the accumulated ballast. All Portugal knew of this shameful practice. As one versed in scripture, compass, and calipers, I served aboard as firemaster, third axeman under Gromfagas, needle doctor, rope puller, and priest. Our crew was spirited and bold. The captain, Jonathan Brabizel, nicknamed Drupak, in every port, though none knew why, was a man of great stature, quiet in manner, but cursed with 2 defects. First, in his youth upon a cannibal isle, he had learned to drink sulphuric acid in place of brandy and never broke the habit. Second, upon his forehead grew a natural horn, hard as a cow's, which he hid beneath hair and cap. When enraged, or after a draught of acid, he would storm from the helm, bellowing, goring sailors, trampling and overturning all. Some whispered he even left cow-like patties, though I cannot confirm. Much joy we found in little Malkirek Kurdeplo, a hunchbacked kitchen boy, lively and full of jokes, who cheered the crew of 9 rogues, each the toughest in Portugal. Bosun alla Piastro, called Vucufluoco, for in a Southampton brawl a beer mug was driven into his eye socket, leaving him forever with a glassy monocle. His strength was such that he could squeeze juice from a salted biscuit. Sebastiano Morejaw, once a galley slave, boasted that in the storming of Saragossa he violated half the town and burned the other. Yet he had a surprising gift for inscriptions, carving witty graffiti on doors and walls, and he adored stacking coins, delighting in the monarch's image. Brabiaga and Grabiaga, brothers fused at the waist and rump, could only be hired together. They quarreled constantly, one pulling left, the other right, so they achieved nothing but clawing each other's hair, except in storms when necessity forced agreement. Anselmo Tortolare, so thin he vanished in fog, bore a hole through his body, pierced accidentally by the mate sharpening a blade. The wound never closed, and the wind whistled mournful tunes through it, stretching his face into melancholy. The 8th sailor vanished into a wheel of Edam cheese. Sent to inspect the cargo, he burrowed into the largest cheese and never returned. Only the empty rind remained, and scraps of his drawers. Rats must have finished him. The 9th was the cook, so monstrously fat he could not climb the gangplank. He was hoisted aboard by crane and lowered through a hole in the roof into the galley, which was then boarded shut. He never left, and I myself carried him bacon, beans, biscuits, and beef. Thus did our crew, after leaving Lisbon, patch sails, grease ropes with ox fat, chew tobacco, and scrub the deck for a month and 16 days. With the wind at our backs, we reached the port of Yoka-Pioram. Opening the hatches, we found only buffalo moss and barrels of beer remaining. No cheese at all, but rats beyond counting. On land. Once ashore, we loaded 1,000 Gramstick Lipians, as well as several Anarchabas still fresh, and 34 tins of shot and smoky powder, of which more shall be said. Setting out on our return voyage, after 3 weeks of fine sailing, we were caught in what is called a tame cyclone. A cyclone is as though the air were scooped up, pressed flat like a cake, with a hole in the middle, called the eye, while the sides thrash and blow without measure. A ship caught in such a storm leaps day and night, until men's joints twist against nature and their teeth ache from constant clattering. One mountain of water after another struck our stern, and so we drifted 3 days and nights, our spirits failing. The captain lashed himself to the brambomstang with a jug of sulphuric acid, warming his soul with it and commanding us to be brave. His mate spun the wheel one way and then the other, but it was useless. Everywhere was the same blackness, the howl of wind, clouds tearing overhead, and calamity without end. On the fourth day we all stood at the pumps, for the cargo had strained the ship's sides and water was rising in the hold. Monsters splashed about us in the sea, leviathans, stink-splashers, shameless sirens, sea-eaters, and other horrors, so that our hearts quailed and we longed to make peace with God, wondering why he had fashioned such grotesques when he might have arranged things otherwise. At last we reached the boundary of known waters, and at a latitude I shall later reveal, we beheld a vast whitish cloud upon the sea. The sailors fell to their knees, declaring it was the very vestibule of hell into which we must surely fall. But I thought better, for the Jesuit fathers, well versed in such matters, had described to me the gates and devices of hell in detail, and I remembered it looked quite otherwise. Drawing nearer, we were driven into the cloud by merciless wind, and soon the tossing ceased. A great brightness arose, and we glided upon a boundless calm. Cordeplo, standing atop the mast, cried out with a mighty voice, "Land! Land!" Joy erupted among us. The captain, in his delight, jabbed me in the leg with his horn, a mark I bear to this day. Lowering the boat from its ropes, 6 of us with the captain climbed in, dipped our oars, and rowed toward the shore. Thus ends the first part of my writing, and here I draw the line. Part 2. It turned out that the land we had sighted, grown over with cactus, breadfruit trees, and milking goats, was an island called Angusta by its dark-skinned inhabitants. It rose from the sea like a hat. Its brim formed the coastal plains, lush with greenery, while deeper inland the crown swelled into a ring of towering mountains capped with snow. At the very center, where the hat's dome lay, stretched a splendid valley with a lake and gardens. There stood the capital, named Arcactuan. Stepping ashore, we were met by the astonished figures of the natives, and fear bit into our hearts. Were they not unbelieving cannibals, ready to roast us on open fire? Yet they brought us coconuts, pineapples, and other food in abundance. Returning to the ship, the captain declared, "These are pagans, utterly lost. They walk naked, eat bananas for free, and have no liquor, only soft words from their brethren. We must make them a kingdom." At once he ordered the cannons dragged ashore, loaded them with shot, and himself touched each fuse with glowing iron. Thunder and stench erupted, and brandfugases, balls, nipals, eared bombs, and carcasses flew to the shore, smashing the huts of the islanders. By evening, after the fire was set, the elders were dragged aboard, and the captain proclaimed that from this moment the island was a Portuguese kingdom. For the salvation of their dark souls, baptism would be performed the next day, and those who resisted would be spitted. He commanded fine food be brought to the natives, and announced their freedom was ended. "From today, we rule here." To make sure the elder understood, he struck his head with a boatswain's awl. The elder, bleeding, asked whether all aboard shared this opinion, that the island's liberty was finished. Being of gentler spirit than the rest, I said it seemed to me an injustice. For this I was promptly gored by the captain's horn. The islanders departed in tears. That night, after supper, the captain slept soundly, drunk on acid, while the crew chattered of how each would return to Portugal with 6 slaves upon his back. I alone was troubled, and with reason. At midnight, while all slept, the islanders crept aboard, fell upon the crew, and bound them with cactus thorns, carrying them off one by one like sheep. I was ordered to sit upon the shore. Under guard, I watched as the captives were urged to drink some potion. When they refused as one, the islanders tried to force it upon them, but failed. Then they led them to a great rock, from which at intervals a fountain burst forth, water hot as fire and stinking of sulphur. This spring they called geyser. Into it they hurled the sailors without pardon or mercy, weeping like beavers as they did so. At last they threw in the cook, whose corpulent body plugged the vent and spoiled the geyser. Then the elders came to me and said I need not fear. "We are a free people," they declared, "and none shall make us slaves." In time I found their nation dear to my heart, and I dwelt among them 43 years, as I shall recount. At first they asked me what faith it was we had tried to impose upon them, a faith that everywhere commanded murder and fire. Ready for martyrdom, eager to dispel the darkness in their minds, I began to preach the gospel. "You say," they replied, "that your faith commands love of neighbor, yet the ruins of our homes still smoke. How do you reconcile this? Surely you lie, as proven by your trembling legs shaking like reeds in the wind. But fear not, no hair of your head shall fall." I answered that all I had said of Christianity was true, and that my countrymen prided themselves on being more Catholic than any other nation. Yet when a man begins to practice the faith, his weak nature introduces certain flaws. "Flaws?" repeated the islanders. They looked at one another in silence, then spoke again. "And this king of whom your commander spoke, who is he?" As best I could, I painted for them the majesty of the Catholic monarch, his purple robes, the splendor of his chambers, the diversions of his palace. "Aha," they said, "so your king is your supreme ruler? Since you allow him to govern you, he must be a man of great virtue and wisdom. Tell us, then, of the one who now reigns over you." This put me in difficulty. For our monarch, Alfonso, I knew only two things. First, that as a child he tore the tails from cats, a tendency he retained as king. Some courtiers even praised it as proof of steadfast character. Second, that when signing a decree condemning his brother, Prince de Oro, to slow burning at the stake, he remarked to his minister, "You have given me a vile pen, Marquis." Thinking that these savages would not grasp the subtleties of European court life, I concealed my ignorance on the matter. I searched then for idols, effigies, or images that I might smash and proclaim the true God. Yet they had no such figures. When asked, they replied that what they called God was the spirit of justice and goodness dwelling in every heart. I asked if they prayed to him. They did not know what prayer was, and when I explained, they said I was mistaken. What profit could there be in muttering words? The only profit lay in living rightly. I disagreed, speaking of salvation of the soul. Just then a child fell ill and died, and its father nearly lost his senses. To comfort him, I told of the lives of saints, of Simeon's Stylites who stood upon a pillar for 30 years in heat and rain to gain eternal light. The father replied that it seemed selfish to him. If Simeon had done it for others, sacrificing his own soul to aid another, it would be worthy, just as he himself would not spare blood or pain to save his child, for their custom was not to save oneself, but one's neighbor. Setting aside matters of faith, for later years I busied myself with their way of life. I found they had plenty of goods, each practicing a craft. One made shoes, another plows, a third wagons. They had no money at all. If you wanted sandals, you went to the shoemaker, chose a pair, bowed, and departed. I said, "This is a poor system. I might take all the shoes, and what then?" They laughed. Are you a centipede that you need so many shoes?" I had no answer. I marveled also at their marriage customs. A man came to a woman and said, "I love you. Be my wife, my friend." She answered, "Yes," or "No," and that was all. If yes, they built a hut, or asked a carpenter, and lived together in work and joy. If discord arose, they parted politely, saying they had mistaken each other's temperaments, and went their separate ways without shouting or tearing hair. I asked why they had no sacrament, no record in a book, for they were literate, no parchment deed. An elder, learned and respected, replied, "What use are parchment, ink, and wax seals if there is no true affection? External bonds, spoken formulas, vows, mumbling oaths, what are they if the heart is ashes and ruin? Love must be in the heart, not in the book. Without it, nothing." I asked if they made documents when buying or leasing houses or other contracts. He said, "No one buys here. Each makes what he can, brings it to the storehouse, and whoever needs it takes it. Fields are tilled together, grain sown, bread baked." Seeing my astonishment, he asked what was strange in that. "What if someone refuses to work?" I asked. "You mean sick?" he said. "We cure the sick. No one is forced to work." "No," I said, "not sickness. Suppose a healthy man refuses to work, living off others." The elder smiled. "How can he be healthy if he will not work? He is sick in mind. We shall cure him until he sees the truth. Without work, man cannot live. If one refused to breathe, would that not be sickness? If he held his breath, he would die. So, too, would we all perish if we ceased to work. Since no one wishes to die before his time, all work. Moreover, work is pleasure. You do not notice it, just as you do not notice the delight of breathing every day. But plunge your head into water, and you will feel what a treasure air is. So it is with work." Thus he confounded me with his talk of breathing, and I knew not what to reply. I realized the honesty and goodness of these people was extraordinary. They believed in their word to the death, kept it always, and needed no courts, guards, halberdiers, stocks, tar, or executioners. I asked if they had wars. They did not know what that was. I tried to explain, recalling the cannon fire of our Galeota, the streams of blood, the ripping of bellies with bayonets, the slicing of heads with sabers, and other arts of battle. They listened in horror and sorrow, asking if in my country any man might kill his neighbor at will, and why. I said that killing in duel was forbidden by faith, but when a great host gathered under a margrave, king, or other ruler, then to invade another land, burn cities, slaughter, and plunder, this was glorious. They did not understand, and said I babbled nonsense. I noticed also that they mixed a green liquid into my food, which frightened me, thinking they meant to poison me, but it proved otherwise. From a cactus called the green fang, they pressed an emerald juice stored in great vats, tasting of fresh honey and with wondrous effect. Whoever drank a few sips must do good, even against his will. Though his nature rebelled, he would embrace his enemy and offer him his last shirt. The people themselves did not drink it, feeling no need, but kept the recipe from their ancestors for dark times, should enemies invade. The liquor did not intoxicate or amuse, but uplifted human morals. They told me it was mixed into my food in small measure, lest I be converted too quickly, for evil vapors must first be expelled. Eager to become good at once, I secretly drained a whole jug, though they warned me to keep moderation. The effects soon appeared. Falling to my knees, I made public confession of my sins before the town, begging them to impale me and gouge out my eyes, for I was a swine and a vile reptile. Doing penance, I stripped off my clothes and offered myself to lie at the threshold of their common house as a doormat. Not wishing to allow my disgrace, they covered me with blankets and poured water over me until the excess goodness left my body, which it did after 3 days. From the island, one could sail by boat to many places, for there was a cluster of islets forming an archipelago. The Arcactuans themselves never voyaged, but I, restless by nature, soon asked for a boat and set out. On the first islet, small but fair, covered with white flowers, lived people who built tables with only one leg, so they must always topple. Yet in every family someone sat at the table to hold it up. When I advised them to add more legs, they attacked me at once and tore a piece from my ear, and I barely escaped. Sailing further, I found an islet inhabited by people like us, only with darker skin, who all went about on all fours. Men, women, and children crawled through the town. The people crawled about on all fours, and I asked why they did not walk on 2 legs. They looked at me with great astonishment, not knowing such a thing was possible. One rose at once, and with delight at how pleasant it was, began to leap and caper. The others quickly followed. They cried out that I was their great savior and wise man, and begged me to become their chief. But I refused, understanding that it is better to be a servant among the wise than a king among fools. In impenetrable fog, there sounded a steady, slow rumble. The Secretary of State leaned in vain over the rail of the motorboat, straining his eyes, but his gaze drowned in the gray and pearly mists, sometimes parting before the dark prow, sometimes thickening and swallowing all around. Suddenly the wall of vapor wavered and broke apart. Blinded by the burst of light, the minister closed his eyes for a moment. The sun's disk touched the peaks of distant mountains, their immense shadows stretching longer and longer, covering the gentle slopes and palm groves in bluish twilight. The last red rays lit the bright shoreline toward which the motorboat sped. The keel sank into sand and stopped. The minister stepped ashore. The beach swarmed with vehicles and people. From the open bows of landing craft rolled long lines of trucks onto the sand. Cranes creaked, engines roared, gulls shrieked, and human voices carried far in the clear air. Nearby, a sleek silver Cadillac halted. The minister climbed in, and the car moved at once. They drove through a native village. The street was so narrow that at one point the car had to stop and back between 2 huts to let pass the motorized column of the religious corps. On the roof of each vehicle stood a missionary in full gear, microphone in hand. In a side street, a great tank truck, gleaming like a greenish fish, had stopped. Men stretched a banner between palm tops. "Coca-Cola throughout the world." The minister waved kindly. Just beyond the village, they passed a sanitary column. Soldiers seized the natives and sprayed them white with DDT from giant sprayers. Others drove jeeps through the countryside, tossing candy at the heads of the islanders, who stepped shyly aside, smiling faintly as the vehicles raised clouds of dust. Half a kilometer beyond the last hut stood a corrugated aluminum shack of the civil administration. Dozens of reporters had gathered. Some photographed little children with great black eyes. Others lay on the grass with inflatable cushions under their heads, sipping gin. A few crowded around Jokelin's automatic lunch wagon, enjoying 40-cent mutton in tomato sauce. At sight of the government Cadillac, they leaped up. "How are you, boys?" called the minister cheerfully. "How goes it?" "Eh, Mr. Dulles, nothing happens here," said the nearest, with a typewriter strapped to his chest. "Hot as hell, the natives stink, and the only event was a crate of Bibles falling from a crane and squashing one of them. That's good for page 3, but we need a front-page story." "You want a press conference?" The minister paused before the shack, frowning slightly, then masking displeasure with a smile. All right, boys, but only 5 minutes. Attention, I begin. Radio reporters rushed forward, dragging coils of cable, thrusting black microphones to his mouth as if offering him some strange drink. Typewriters clattered, phonographs whirred, and in the thickening dusk the flashbulbs burst, restoring daylight colors to faces and surroundings. In those flashes appeared gaudy shirts painted with dragons and flowers, tropical helmets, and above all, the Secretary of State, who mounted the shack's steps and spoke smoothly. The United States extends over the unknown island the protective hand of progress and democracy to shield its God-fearing, industrious inhabitants from the threat of communism. Faithful to its ideals of democracy and equality, the government of the United States grants the island full autonomy and will soon organize secret, equal, and direct elections in which the natives shall choose the form of government most suited to them. Thus opens before them the American way of life, the way of freedom and progress. The minister crushed his cigarette, nodded lightly to those around him, and entered the shack. Questions? Questions? Rose the confused clamor. Only 5 minutes. Important matters call me, he said, hand on the door. Ask, boys. When will we have freedom to move about the island? Will the UN send observers to the elections? Are there communists here? Is it true there are uranium deposits? The minister smiled, showing white teeth. Cameras rattled. 3 giant floodlights swung forward on a crane arm and bathed the scene in dazzling light. The United Nations will send its people, yes. Of uranium, we know nothing. Our actions are entirely disinterested. Freedom of movement begins today. Passes are issued by the press office. No sooner had he spoken than the crowd rushed to the adjacent shack. An enterprising cameraman shouted at his assistants and, straddling the crane tower, filmed from above the pushing and jostling throng. Only a few reporters remained by the minister. The nearest spoke. What's this story about cactus juice, Mr. Dulles? The minister burst out laughing. I've given you the facts. The ducks you must invent yourselves. Farewell, boys. Greetings to all your readers. His last words were drowned in the thunder of approaching jet planes. Night had fallen. Nearby, the glowing eyes of cars slid silently past. In the village, white rectangles lit up. On screens stretched between palms, the latest films were shown to the natives. Tragedy Behind the Iron Curtain, and The Honeymoon of the Strangler. Huge Coca-Cola tankers, decorated with neon pipes of many colors, lumbered lazily along. From afar came the sound of bells, broadcast from the records of the religious corps. The minister entered the shack. In the first room sat dozens of clerks at their desks. Hello, how are you? He tossed at them in passing. His secretary, poring over papers at a side table, leaped to his feet. Mr. Dulles, a cablegram from the White House. Is anyone here? Asked the minister, glancing at the dispatch. Yes. Graystreff from Carbide Union, Truly from Pan American Mining, and Alice from General Motors. They couldn't wait. They've been here an hour already. The minister waved his hand, not listening to the end, and entered the adjoining room. An electric lamp burned overhead. In the center stood a great desk. To the side, on 3 sleek loungers, lay the men. One, larger than the rest, had his legs stretched over the desk. He was built like a boxer, fair-haired, in a white silk shirt and shorts. His cork helmet lay beneath his chair. Crossing his muscular, hairy legs, he sucked a cold drink through a straw. The second breathed loudly, like an asthmatic, his bald head covered with a handkerchief, reeking of sharp perfume. He smoked a pipe and stroked his fat, unshaven chin. The third was thin, frail, with the unhealthy yellow complexion of a stomach patient. His eyes were hidden behind slanted black glasses, and he scribbled in a notebook. None stirred at Dullus's entrance. Only Greystreth saluted with one finger, not removing the straw from his mouth. For a long moment there was silence. From behind a metal partition came the rapid clatter of typewriters and teletypes. Dullus crossed the room, perched sideways on the desk, tore open a packet of cigarettes, rolled one between his fingers, and, drawing in smoke, said, "Gentlemen?" "All okay," said Greystreth, dropping one leg from the desk. "Go on." "What should I say? You tell me. How's the uranium?" For several seconds there was silence. "Do you want to play blind man's bluff with the government?" said Dulles, slightly irritated. "Since landing, we've given you full freedom." "Freedom to do business is guaranteed by the Constitution." Greystreth shot back, gulping a large mouthful of greenish drink with ice crystals. "But, Mr. Dulles, the boss arrives tomorrow. I expect you'll provide him proper escort." "Cornelius himself?" The minister raised his brows. "Well, well. But why escort? The natives are like Peruvian balm." "Escort is indeed necessary," said the bald man suddenly, "if only against fellows like Greystreth." The Carbide Union representative smiled maliciously, stretching his thin lips wide. "The natives are balm," he said, "and this island is the best deal I've ever seen." "But when one meets competition that will use any method for its own good," began Truly. "Do you want the quarrel?" asked Dulles. "The government gives you opportunities such as never before." "Oh, drop it. The press conference is over." Truly cut him short. Greystreth's broad grin drove him to fury. "Don't imagine, Greystreth, that you'll swallow everything. Pan American Mining has something to say here, too." "And who's stopping you?" "Gentlemen, let's talk business," Dulles interrupted them. "Do you want government arbitration?" "What would I need arbitration for?" Greystreth burst out laughing. "So what's the matter?" "My experts, geologists, discovered 16% uranium ore in the northern part of the mountain range," said Truly, restraining his anger, "and Greystreth snatched it right from under my nose." "The natives," said Greystreth imperturbably, "are the biggest asses ever seen by my mother's son. They don't sell anything. They give it all away for a smile. Tomorrow I'll get exploitation rights for the territory without limit. That 16% vein is only the beginning, and it cost me, he repeated, savoring his own words, 11 cents, because that's the price of the nylon rattle I gave that blackfellow as a pledge of eternal friendship." "Stop boasting," Truly threw at him. "Mr. Dulles," he continued, turning to the Secretary of State, "the natives really are idiots such as the world has never seen. They'd be ready to clean our boots with their hair if only asked." Alice, who until now had lain silently on his back, suddenly sat up. "For the past quarter hour I've listened to your chatter," he said hotly, "and I haven't heard a single sensible word. Mr. Dulles, then let me ask you, what's this funeral about elections? When do you open that amusement park? And why the hell UN observers? I can already see the racket the English will raise to get themselves admitted to the deal." Dulles toyed with the golden mouse that formed the clasp of his shirt. "Observers must be there. We're putting the blacks in order for your own good. A state where such a heap of blacks has no government at all cannot go on. It's dangerous. Professor Buckledrop says they have here what's called primitive communism." "What?" The three industrialists jumped up and rushed to the minister, who, smiling good-naturedly, made a calming gesture. "Easy, gentlemen, easy. They know nothing of real communism. It's only a primitive economy, a collective way of life." "I can't stand that word," said Truly, nervously. With disgust, he wiped his sweaty neck with a handkerchief. Never mind the semantics. So what does Buckledrop say? He's that sociologist from your brain trust, isn't he? Yes, a very capable fellow. We'll follow his advice. We'll create two parties, Christian Democrats and conservative liberals. That will be the opposition. In their hands will lie the great landed property. But there aren't any Christians here. By the time the UN observers arrive, there will be. That's what the religious corps is for. The mechanical baptismal fonts are already being unloaded. Tomorrow morning, the mass baptisms, visions, conversions, miracles, and whatever you like will begin. And landed property? There aren't any landowners here. That will be arranged too. For now, the matter stands like this. We need money for political agitation, for party bosses, for voting blacks, and so on. We can't use government funds, you understand, so we turn to you. You should have said so right away, drawled Greystreth. He returned to his lounger and sat down. You want cash, eh? Well, then, fine. Carbide Union will maybe give, let's say, 20,000. And I'll give 15, Alice threw in. I'll give 10. Why are you sliding down like that? Carbide Union can't give more? And you, Mr. Truly, you'll make millions here, and none of you wants to give 100,000. It's an investment in your own interest, capital that will pay dividends. All right, I'll give 30,000, said Truly, whose eyes suddenly lit up as if struck by an idea. Greystreth, with his lower lip hanging, watched him suspiciously and muttered, Aha, I see where you're aiming. To have your own people in government, eh? And then to challenge those native gifts? You can forget about that. But where? No, I hadn't even thought of it, Truly defended himself. Greystreth stood up, spread his legs in the middle of the room, shoved his hands in his pockets, and cocked his bird-like head. I don't like, he said, being led by the hand into business by the government. This whole rigmarole with parties doesn't suit me. Liberals, Democrats, it's all nonsense. Maybe even a parliament for the natives. What we need here is a labor force, cheap, not a labor market with unemployed. And no trade unions. That's fine back home. Here, the blacks must be barracked in camps. I've already spotted a couple of good places for such camps. Excellent. You'll have everything. Only please don't use the word camp. Right now, the eyes of the whole world are upon us. And all right, put away your declarations. It will be called native boarding houses. But personally, I'd prefer authority in the form of a tribal chief and a drunken chief at that. Give him $1 worth of liquor and he'll do what's wanted. And when various political activists get hold of the trough, can you imagine how many insatiable mouths there will be? We cannot disgrace ourselves by negotiating with chiefs, said Dulles. The English have been doing that for 300 years, and the result is that all they have left are signboards. I don't understand why parties bother you. Do they bother you in the States? Costs, I say, costs would be lower. There's no point fussing over a few dollars. How generous. Quiet, gentlemen. When do we barrack the blacks? Quiet, gentlemen, shouted Dulles. When none of the UN observers are here anymore, you'll have the blacks behind wire, and together with your parties, you can go complain to Aunt Mary. Don't create fictitious problems and act in solidarity. I want the credit starting tomorrow. Greystreth exchanged glances with Alice and Truly. Fine, he said, returning to his lounger. Tomorrow morning we'll open the cash boxes. Okay, said Dulles, jumping down from the desk. So we're agreed on all points. And as for Cornelius, he turned to the Carbide Union representative, you may rest assured he'll get what he needs. Good night, gentlemen, and good business. The following afternoon, Senator Joe Carroll, head of the political campaign, appeared at Dulles'. This 72-year-old elder was called Boogie Joe by colleagues and associates for the springy gait he owed to penicillin-treated progressive paralysis. Not trusting too much in his supple legs, the senator leaned on a cane whose golden knob, together with his double-breasted gray suit and steel spectacles, gave him the look of an English aristocrat. They sat down in deep armchairs by the wall bar. In the battleship's cabin, it was cool and airy despite the heat outside, thanks to the climate system. "How does it look?" Dulles greeted the senator. Instead of answering, Boogie Joe spread his arms. "What now?" "Mr. Dulles, we're sunk. The natives don't want to join any party." Dulles stood up. "What do you mean?" "They simply don't want to. The religious corps failed completely. My men are coming back from the island and saying—" Talking. Less chatter, Carol, more work. "Did you give them gifts?" "Useless, Mr. Dulles. The natives give everything that's asked of them, but they take nothing themselves." "And money?" "Of course. First $5 a head, then 10. We went up to 50, but with the same results, you might as well give 50,000. "Wait. First, they must be taught trade, right? Did you set small business representatives in motion?" "From the very beginning, but that didn't work either. Mr. Dulles, look at my gray hair. As an American citizen, as a senator, as an old man at the grave who has lived through much, I tell you that nothing like this has ever happened to me. From these blacks, you can—" "Damned black faces!" Dulles snarled, pacing the cabin in great strides. Suddenly he stopped before Carroll. "Well, then, how many do you have?" "Mr. Minister—" "I know well who I am. You don't need to remind me. How many will you have made by Wednesday? On Wednesday, the UN meddlers arrive. 200? At least 100? Well?" "Not a single one." Dulles was so stunned that for a long moment he blinked silently. "Wait, does that mean you haven't found a single native who could be bribed?" "Yes, exactly that. Not one. Allow me to point out that the hurrah optimism of some of our people seemed baseless to me from the start. It all looked too good. Don't you think? The natives were too polite, too kind, too well-behaved, too pleasant, excessively modest. With such people, you can't do politics." Well, don't panic," said Dulles. He walked to the round porthole and looked at the island visible in the distance. Above the palm groves of the coastal plain rose the central mountain massif with its gleaming blue cap of eternal snow. Suddenly he turned toward Carroll. "There are ways for everything," he said. "You'll establish contact with the states." "Yes." "Wait. You'll connect with Washington and summon Farham, Burwell, and Hartley." "Yes, Mr. Dulles." "You'll tell them about the mess we're in and demand that they immediately prepare and deliver by Tuesday about 1,000 blacks, 500 liberals, and 500 of those, what are they called? Christian Democrats. Do you understand me?" "Our American blacks, yes." "Well, exactly. Just train them properly. Teach them what to answer to questions. Only don't let them arrive in clothes. They must be naked with shells on their heads and all that rigmarole. Send Hartley a model of island costume by plane." "Yes, Mr. Dulles, but the natives here are generally much taller than ours, so—" "Nonsense! A black face is a black face, period. We won't bother with idiocies. Start at once. They must be here by Wednesday. Goodbye, Senator. Let me know what the Pentagon replies. Good luck." "What is it?" Dulles asked the secretary who appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Whitney has just arrived, Minister, and wishes to see you." "Excellent. Show him in." Cornelius Van Whitney, president of Carbide Union, passed in the doorway as Carroll was leaving. "Hello, Boogie Joe. You here too?" he called, slapping the senator cordially on the back. The whole cabin filled with the delicate scent of perfume emanating from his spacious, white satin-sheened suit. His pink, smoothly shaven, fleshly face shone with calm. Despite his bulk and age, he moved with astonishing lightness. Behind him came Jeff Peruzzi, head of his bodyguard, who froze by the door. Black-browed, stocky, his muscles filling his elegant dark suit like loaves of bread. "I have a dispatch from my men that there is ore," Cornelius said in a metallic bass to the Secretary of State. "Where's Greystreth? You're not hiding him, are you?" "Welcome, Mr. Whitney. Greystreth has been on the island for 24 hours making deals for you. I expect good ones. Did you give him an escort?" "Oh, that's completely unnecessary. Mr. Whitney, you can't imagine how gentle as doves these islanders are, worthy of full trust. Leave the doves alone. As for gentleness, a correction is needed. My formula is gentleness plus tear gas equals trust. Yes, so Greystreth is on the island. When is he coming back?" "I'll find out right away if it matters to you," said Dulles, still jovial, though stung by the magnate's condescension. He pressed the button of the internal phone. While speaking, he raised his head. The billionaire stood at the wall bar, mixing himself a refreshing drink. It seemed to Dulles that Peruzzi, the famous gangster until Whitney took him into service and paid him well, was smiling maliciously. He looked more closely, but the massive face of the former racketeer expressed nothing. "You're in luck," said Dulles. "Greystreth has just returned and taken a helicopter from the shore. He'll be here in a moment." The billionaire muttered something indistinct that might have meant satisfaction, and silence fell. Soon a tall soldier in tropical uniform opened the door to admit Greystreth. "Ha! Ha! Boss, heaven has sent you." Greystreth saluted with one finger to his helmet, tossed it carelessly to the floor, went to the bar, poured himself a cocktail, and froze with his head cocked, as if wondering what to do with the full glass. At last he rinsed his mouth noisily, drank it down in one gulp, and, setting the bottle back with a bang, turned briskly to Whitney. "President, I must immediately explain something to you. I feel such pangs of conscience." "What do you feel?" "Remorse, but I'll get rid of it right away," Greystreth continued quickly. "In that affair with the Canadian ore, when we swindled the government's control commission out of $60 million, from the fund intended for Senator Mahoney, I skimmed $25,000. There are other little matters, but that one weighed most on my heart. I feel better already," he cried, throwing himself into an armchair with force. Crossing one leg over the other, he patted his muscular calf and, tossing his head back, went on. "For 12 years I've worked for you and always stepped into whatever muck you pointed out, as long as it smelled of dividends. You forced me to commit more villainies than anyone else, but now I forgive you everything, and apart from words of heartfelt devotion, I have nothing. You... From the start of this conversation, the old billionaire's face had flushed with blood. His clenched hands trembled. In his shining white suit, he stood over his comfortably sprawled representative like an avenging angel. "You brat! Insults for complete forgiveness of sins? And to a man who knows all the dirt of your lining?" Greystreth asked, blinking in a disappointed voice. "If not for the fact that I feel an irresistible urge to forgive, I could tell Mr. Dulles quite a bit. For example, about that Canadian ore for which the government paid 300% more than—" "Silence!" The billionaire raised his fist as if to strike Greystreth, who did not even shield himself. On the contrary, his face showed a kind of radiant desperation. At last Whitney restrained himself, turned away, and, approaching a nearby chair, leaned on its armrest with all his strength. After a long moment of absolute silence, when his breathing calmed, he said coldly, turning his head over his shoulder toward Greystreth, "Insults we'll discount later. What did you arrange on the island?"
The island," said Greystreth, closing his eyes dreamily. "The island. You have in mind those exploitation rights and other boring stuff, right? I was with the natives in Arcactuana, and they gave me everything I wanted. Ho, ho, there's plenty there. That must be admitted."
Whitney moved quietly, like a cat, to the table. His face, purple a moment before, paled with emotion. "How much?"
"How should I know? Surely millions of tons," said Greystreth indifferently. "Oh, here, I had the concession," he added, pointing to his pocket.
"Had?" Whitney asked in a terrible voice.
"Well, yes, because I felt sorry for those blacks. Lovely fellows. They came to me with hearts in their hands. So what? Am I worse? I gave them the whole lot and everything I had with me. They didn't want to take it, but I forced it on them. It wasn't much, so I told them that when you came, you'd give them more."
"Greystreth, you've gone mad." The billionaire shook his representative with all his strength.
"Why are you so upset?"
asked Greystreth with concern. "Why did you give them exploitation rights? What am I to give them? Speak, you idiot!"
"What to give them? I think everything. Probably."
"For what?"
"For what?"
Greystreth was genuinely surprised. He thought for a moment, furrowing his brow, then said cheerfully,
"Well, simply, out of love."
He blushed. The billionaire's eyes bulged, and he recoiled from him as if scalded. His gaze met the narrowed, cold eyes of Dulles, who sat on the desk catching every word of the conversation. "Must be sunstroke," he muttered. Then he turned to Peruzzi, standing like a column. "Take care of him." Peruzzi leaped at Greystreth, grabbed him by the neck, bent him to the floor, lifted him up, and in a flash disappeared with him through the door. Whitney stood dazed for a moment, then said reluctantly to Dulles, "Sorry my man put on such a show. Must be sunstroke. Anyway, never mind. Give me 2 companies, preferably Marines, and some armor. I'll go to the island myself."
"Well, yes," said Dulles. "That's indeed an unpleasant story."
He hesitated.
"I hope what Greystreth said about the Canadian ore isn't true, Mr. Whitney."
"What did I hear? You want to interrogate me, Mr. Dulles?"
"Ha, ha, of course not. I was joking. So you'll get everything you wish. Only in your place, I'd take certain precautions. You've surely heard those rumors about cactus juice."
Whitney smiled contemptuously.
"Mr. Dulles, there is no such juice that could force Cornelius Van Whitney to like native cockroaches."
Hardly had Whitney set out into the island's interior when the secretary rushed into the cabin, agitated.
"Mr. Dulles," he cried from the doorway, "an unpleasant story. Truly and Alice have returned from Arcatuana and are carrying on unbelievable antics. Please turn on the television. That one—"
On the glowing screen appeared a sandy beach crowded with soldiers surrounding the industrialists' cars. On the roof of the largest Buick stood Truly, stripping off parts of his clothing and, weeping like a beaver, throwing them to the soldiers. Alice, kneeling on the roof of another car, was signing blank checks and tossing them into the crowd.
"What does this mean?" shouted the minister angrily. "Are they drunk or what?" "Mr. Dulles, they speak of the juice. To hell with the juice. Isolate them somewhere. Lock them up until they sober. I've already given the appropriate orders. And tell the colonel to keep 3 battalions of gendarmerie ready. The devil knows what else may happen."
Troubled by bad premonitions, the minister conferred with his brain trust until dusk. The next morning, during the conference, he was informed of Whitney's return. The billionaire wished to see him. "Well, good that old Cornelius is back. He surely didn't fall for native tricks," said the minister to the senators around him. At that moment, Whitney himself entered the cabin and with a gesture of his hand indicated he wished to remain alone with Dulles. As soon as the door closed behind the last of those leaving, the Secretary of State asked, "Well, how was it? Did you get the lands?"
"Forget the lands!" exclaimed the billionaire. "My dear, I wanted to apologize for my rude greeting. Yes, I was rude to you yesterday morning," he insisted energetically, waving his hand and not letting the minister speak. Dulles noticed with astonishment that the billionaire was lisping heavily. "And now, Mr. Dulles, I will reveal to you first the joyful news. From today, my beloved miners will finally know a happy life. Almighty God! I cannot understand how I lived until now, while thousands of workers perished of silicosis in my hideous mines. That stinginess, that human greed, I have no words strong enough to condemn it. But from now on, everything will change. Peace on earth to men of good will. We shall rejoice together in the beauty of this pleasant vale. Do you see? That rhymes. And Peruzzi invented a melody for it last night, a kind of hymn. What has happened to you? What are you saying?" stammered Dulles. "What am I saying? I'm saying there is no more carbide union. What bliss!" "What does that mean?" babbled Dulles, retreating before the angelically smiling Whitney. The latter blushed like a young maiden. "Did you notice I have no teeth? Well, I gave them to a worthy old native who hosted us all night. Poor fellow, all his teeth had long fallen out, and mine fit him perfectly. I was so delighted. We all sang, the chauffeurs, the escort, and how we later repented. I thought I would cry myself to death. What bliss! What bliss! Mr. Whitney, ore, uranium, jokes," stammered Dulles, clutching his head. The old billionaire smiled with toothless gums like an infant. "Uranium," he said. "What for uranium? For bombs, eh? God forbid, never again. But, Mr. Dulles, I must tell you with great shame and sorrow that indeed I robbed the state treasury of tens of millions of dollars in connection with that unfortunate Canadian ore. But I will return everything to the last cent, even if I must work as a sand carrier until the end of my life. Do you know that my former guardian angel, Jeff Peruzzi, has decided to become a composer? He will write hymns, religious songs, and cantatas. Yes, Mr. Dulles, that is, dear brother." He pulled from his back pocket a flat whiskey flask filled with a thick, dark green liquid, which, when uncorked, gave off a penetrating aromatic scent. "What is that?" whispered Dulles, his voice failing him. "A wonderful drink, cactus juice, which together we shall sip to the end of our days. My noble brother, here, drink, you'll see, you too will become good." "You drank that?" gasped Dulles, paralyzed with fear, watching the flask with its infernal contents approach his mouth. Suddenly he cried out in despair and knocked the bottle away, so that the liquid splashed onto his shirt. With one leap he hid behind the desk, and with both hands pressed all the alarm buttons at once. 3 officials rushed in, the secretary, a civilian agent, and a reporter with a camera raised to his eye. At this sight, Whitney climbed onto a chair and, raising the flask high, began to declaim, "On the fierce lion without offense you shall ride. Seize him! "Arrest him! He's gone mad! And take the flask from him!" shouted the minister.
The corridor swarmed with the oval helmets of the gendarmerie. As they led him away, the old billionaire blessed his tormentors with a gesture of his right hand and sent airy kisses to the gendarmes standing further off. Soon, Colonel Murphy, head of the ship's FBI service, was summoned before Dulles. "Mr. Dulles," he said, "before going to you, Whitney sent a dispatch to Washington. Here is the text intercepted by our wiretap." Dulles glanced at the paper, and his legs gave way. The billionaire was calling on his lawyers to carry out a formal act of donation of all Carbide Union mines to the workers employed in them.
"I feel faint. Chloramine, and bring me the brain trust,"
groaned Dulles, collapsing into a chair. Until midnight, chemists examined the poisonous liquid. Then their delegation, led by the venerable Professor Delaney, appeared in Dulles's cabin. "This liquid," said the old scholar, "contains volatile bodies from the group of isocyclopentanoperhydrophenantrine compounds, partly bound with alkyl polyvinyl chains, partly with beta-parametaphenyl."
"What does that mean?"
interrupted Dulles. "The exact chemical formula we can give only after longer study."
"But how does it work, for God's sake?"
The biologists spoke. They declared that the tested liquid exerts a peculiar effect on the human mind, producing an uncontrollable urge to do good to one's fellow men. In particular, it forces a person to renounce greater wealth and fills him with indescribable disgust for drawing profit from another's labor, for all financial and stock exchange operations. Moreover, Mr. Minister, it causes loss of the ability to obey orders. A gendarme to whom we administered a tablespoon, when his superior ordered him to strike a native, asked, "Why should I beat him?" Dulles trembled.
"So it is a poison."
The scholars bowed their heads.
"Gentlemen, I open the session," cried the minister with fire in his eyes. "A mortal danger hangs over our homeland. Black poisoners threaten the most precious personal virtues of the American citizen, respect for money and love of business. If we cease to carry out great commercial transactions, if attachment to great capital crumbles to dust, if love of the dollar perishes, then how shall we differ from animals? Our dearest currency is endangered. The sanctified temple of prosperity, the stock exchange, is undermined. Mortal danger hangs over private initiative, the foundation of family and state. To work, then, my gentlemen! Sharpen your minds. I call upon you. Save America. Save the whole world."
After deliberation, the Occupation Military Authority issued orders decreeing under penalty of death the destruction of all stocks of cactus juice, green fang. Under the same penalty, it was forbidden to offer, consume, sell, drink, or store cactus juice and all its derivatives to all civilian persons, natural and legal, as well as to members of the armed forces stationed on the island and on United States naval units. Tank patrols, armed sea patrols, and a double protective customs barrier were introduced. Military police and gendarmerie teams went into the field, destroying the poisonous liquid, spraying the cacti with oil, burning them and covering them with earth. Meanwhile, the botanical section of the Brain Trust worked feverishly, trying to find a scientific way to wipe the infernal plant from the face of the earth, while Dulles, having issued the necessary orders, still wiped mechanically at his lips, on which Whitney had splashed a few drops of the liquid. Further tragic events occurred. First, 3 flying detachments of military police fraternized with the natives and brought to the shore a large barrel of liquid, on which was painted the inscription, "Green Cactus Cocktail." Officers tore off their star insignia, clicked glasses with the natives, and drank brotherhood with them. The Marine unit that was supposed to disarm them was demoralized and joined the revelry. Singing in chorus, the soldiers scattered along the coast and destroyed weapons.
"This is mutiny! Mutiny!" cried Dulles, watching from the deck the shore illuminated by the blinding searchlights of battleships. In the patches of light appeared groups of natives walking arm in arm with sailors. "Tell the commanders of the embarked units that they will receive double pay if—"
"Mr. Dulles," interrupted the reporting lieutenant colonel gloomily, shaking his head, "they are throwing money into the sea. They say they don't need it."
"Throwing dollars into the sea?" screamed the minister in horror. "May I never live to see such disgrace."
For a long moment he struggled with weakness. Then, realizing he was surrounded by many eyes and hearing the snapping of camera shutters, he looked once more at the shore and went below deck. Meanwhile, love and brotherhood spread through the units stationed on the coast like fire. By 1 o'clock, no one except senior officers escorted by paratroopers with dogs on leashes could go ashore. At 4 in the morning, Colonel Murphy, Dulles's right hand and head of the FBI investigative division, was sent on reconnaissance to assess the situation. In 3/4 of an hour, a terrifying tumult reached Dulles's ears. Running to the deck, he saw a huge burning pyre, around which, holding hands, uniformed and civilian FBI agents danced. Illuminated by the leaping flames, Colonel Murphy accompanied them on a harmonica.
"What does this mean?"
cried the minister, rooted to the spot before the circle of dancers. "We're burning secret files and records of the Reds," Murphy shouted cheerfully, cutting nimble steps. "Already 1.5 tons has gone into the fire. Soon the devil will take the rest. Come dance with us. All men are brothers." "And I like only bananas," sang back the chorus of FBI officers. Dulles fled to the captain's bridge and from there directed the action undertaken by elite paratroopers from the aircraft carrier Tennessee. Dropped from helicopters, the jumpers extinguished the fire and captured the possessed. From that moment, all communication with the island was cut off. Telephone wires and cables supplying electricity to institutions and buildings erected by the former civil administration on the shore were severed. Then the battleships majestically sailed from the inner lagoon to the outer, where they again dropped anchor. At 11 in the morning, Dulles, his head wrapped in ice bags, sat at his desk in the cabin renamed Headquarters, surrounded by bottles of faithful Coca-Cola which sustained him in those difficult moments, drafting an order forbidding the use of the word good in greetings. "Mr. Dulles, you look so bad," began the secretary with concern as he entered the cabin. The minister jumped from his chair and looked at him suspiciously. "Are you pitying me?" "Because you're overworked." "And why are you so good? Maybe you, too, drank that poison," roared Dulles. At noon, the Brain Trust convened. They considered the possibility of bombing the island. "Now, after that cursed publicity of free, secret, direct elections?" asked Dulles. "Impossible." "Allow me, Mr. Dulles," noted Professor Buckledrop. "It seems you underestimate the danger." "I underestimate?" "Yes, I think so. With the natives, we could easily cope, but I fear that in the United States there will be personalities who will desire to have at their disposal such a powerful means as cactus juice."
"What do you mean?"
"An industrialist who treated his competitors with this liquid could, in a few hours, easily take over their shares. A small dose administered to Morgan, DuPont, or another of our greats would cause a stock market catastrophe unknown in American history." A gloomy silence fell, in which Professor Donovan asked to speak. This venerable scholar had spent half his life in research, perfecting scientific methods of dispersing strikers. The others turned their heads toward him with respect and hope. The old man tightened his pince-nez on his nose and said, I must tell you, colleagues, that you exaggerate. Yes, exaggerate. This liquid is not so terrible. An hour ago I tried it, naturally only out of scientific curiosity, and I must state that it did me quite well. I say quite well. I would personally call it an agatropic hormone, that is, one inclining to do good. I therefore propose that we all, as we are here, take a sip. I have prepared a modest supply for you." Saying this, with a roguish look, he pulled from under the cloth-covered table a glass vessel full of green liquid. A cry of horror escaped Dullus's lips. "Seize him!" The venerable scholars threw themselves on their colleague, who, already in shackles, with movements of bound hands, showered them with blessings. In the confusion, the glass vessel broke and flooded the table with green liquid. A strong aromatic scent filled the hall. "Don't breathe, or it will soften us," shouted Professor Buckledrop in a trembling voice, and, covering his nose and mouth with a handkerchief, rushed to the door where the other participants of the conference were crowding. Within a minute, 2 rows of firefighters in gas masks, with hoses in hand, were running up the stairs. Streams of disinfectant poured into the hall, carrying away piles of secret protocols. Meanwhile, the Brain Trust continued deliberations in Dullus's private office, reduced by 2 persons, for besides Professor Donovan, it was necessary to isolate also Docent Tracy, into whose mouth a drop of liquid must have fallen, since he suddenly put to vote a motion that all present begin work on strengthening peace among nations. When the dangerous man was neutralized, Professor Stulpenthal spoke. "I propose," he said, "that our government demand the convening of an extraordinary UN session to recognize the islanders as dangerous aggressors." "That would be good," said Dullus, "but that takes time, at least 2 weeks, and meanwhile, God alone knows what may happen. If only we had at least one man able to resist the action of the poison." Silence fell, emphasizing the words spoken by Professor Nuttycorn. "There is no such man." All eyes turned to the scholar. Conscious of the impression he had made, he uttered only one word: "McCarthy." A joyful murmur arose. Even on Dullus's weary face appeared a spark of hope. "By God, Professor, you are right. In other circumstances, I would never say this. It's a state secret. But McCarthy is the coldest scoundrel ever to walk the Senate floor, and that means something. He'd strip the skin from his own father's corpse if it brought him political success. I'll connect with the White House immediately, and tomorrow we'll have him here grinding away." The dawn was barely breaking through the clouds over the ocean when a motorboat left the admiral's ship, carrying a solitary man. The famous chairman of the Committee on Un-American Activities, advocate of lynching, friend of distinguished fascists, stood at the helm upright, and from beneath his bristling brows observed the approaching deserted shore without a flicker of his eyelids. On the ships, reporters crowded the radio stations to transmit to their newspapers the historic words of the providential man: "I will crush the black brutes." Dullus, surrounded by his retinue of senators interspersed with generals' uniforms, watched from the highest deck of the battleship Shenandoah the motorboat disappearing into the morning mist with dread and hope. For 3 hours, the radios tuned to the island's frequency were silent, until the silence was broken by McCarthy's speech, in a voice swollen with tears, declaring himself the last scoundrel and beginning to announce good news to the world. "So be it," said Dullus, wrapping a blood-stained handkerchief around the hand with which he had smashed the radio speaker. "The time for deeds has come. Where is Guderian?" On the minister's order, a parachute division of the newly formed Wehrmacht under Field Marshal Guderian was dropped into the very heart of the island, its capital, Arcactuana. Before the jump, each paratrooper drank under medical supervision a double dose of spirits with Coca-Cola. This measure was supposed to protect his body against the action of the cactus. By dusk, the division had taken the capital and established radio contact with battleships. But at night, the natives slyly mixed a grain of cactus into the bread. That was enough. The paratroopers laid down their arms, and Guderian himself became a vegetarian. The battleships sailed out to the open sea. Jet bomber patrols pierced the skies. Dulles conferred by radio with the president, demanding the immediate dispatch of a large atomic bomb. Meanwhile, in the night of August 7th to 8th, half a company of military police announced aboard the carrier Minnesota the advent of the kingdom of earthly love. An immediate investigation revealed that 2 sergeants had somehow come into possession of an 8-gallon keg of cactus juice. On the ships, a state of emergency was declared. Panic reigned. Any signs of kindness, gentleness, or friendly feelings became suspect as the first symptoms of infection. Those showing them were examined and isolated in shipboard prisons. Within hours, the cells were so overcrowded that the battleship Potomac had to be converted into a floating jail. It also became necessary to introduce certain innovations into the sailors' religious service, namely, that the priests in their sermons must refrain from mentioning love of neighbor. Dulles, collapsing from fatigue and sleeplessness, worked incessantly, surrounded by a wall of 20 agents obliged to taste every morsel of food and every drink intended for the minister. At 5 in the morning the next day, New York newspapers carried the extraordinary news that the minister had been fed by a stewardess with a cactus pie. The stock exchange reacted instantly, expecting steps from one infected with goodness. Shares of all armament corporations lost value by the minute. Dulles, not leaving the microphone with a voice hoarse from strain, denied the false reports. "Calm, citizens of the States," he cried. "I am not good. I am the same Dulles you know. I feel fine, and my life is still devoted to armaments and crushing the Reds. Away with goodness! Long live the corporations and monopolies!" But the teletypes clattered relentlessly, spewing from their metal innards figures of ever more violently falling stock prices. By noon, the papers of firms like Bethlehem Steel and General Motors could be bought for 20% of their nominal value, and by 1 o'clock all Wall Street convulsed in the throes of a crash. Ruined brokers leaped from skyscraper windows, tearing down telephone wires in their fall, clinging to receivers pressed to their ears until the last moment, and with them plunged headlong onto the street pavement, white with shares and securities. "Connect me with Morgan," shouted Dulles. "Where is Greenwald? Send cholera bacteria. Lots of bacteria. And the atomic bomb. Where's DuPont? Save the dividends. Save the dividends. Hold out a few more hours and we'll destroy them." Darkness clouded his eyes. Feeling everything around him whirl faster and faster, he still saw the glowing patch of the television screen, on which one after another flowed great sheets of extraordinary events with screaming headlines: "General Motors stock not worth the paper it's printed on," "Workers sinking tanks and cannons in all ports," "The Federal Bureau of Investigation has collapsed." "Doom!" groaned the unhappy minister. "Doom! The FBI, foundation of our civilization, bulwark of Atlantic culture. Where's Morgan? Where's the police? More tear gas, more clubs." But the darkness remained silent, as if driven by wind. Torn sheets of newspapers and rolls of telegraph tape flew through it until all vanished, and from the gloom emerged a fluttering flock of doves, carrying in their beaks a great blue ribbon inscribed, "Peace and Disarmament." This blow the weary soul of the Secretary of State could not withstand. At the sight of the dreadful birds, he lost consciousness and awoke. He sat still at his desk. The climate apparatus noiselessly pumped fragrant, cool air. The clock ticked on the wall beneath Washington's thoughtful face, and beyond the glass panel of the door the massive silhouette of the guard darkened reassuringly. Trembling, Dulles wiped the cold sweat from his forehead and for a long moment still wrestled with the memory of the nightmare. Then his sobered gaze rested on the open magazine. It showed the ending of a story about a manuscript in a bottle. He pondered briefly, then with a firm hand drew the notebook closer, reached for his pen, and wrote down the author's name with a short note. Pass to the FBI for anti-American activity. You've been listening to pre-1990s speculative fiction readings with a highlight on science fiction by Darrell T. Smith II. Please consider clicking the donation link in the description box. Thank you so much for your time and your imagination.